Hey everyone, before we get into this video, I wanted to remind you guys that any tier on our Patreon grants you complete access to our Discord server, which is full of amazing content for everyone. And just by being in the Discord gives you free entry to our tournaments. We currently have 4 tournaments a month. Prizing consists of booster boxes and merchandise, and with that, let's get right into the video.
Hey guys, so this is something new that we're trying for our YouTube, where once a month we will be picking one of our more informational videos, I guess lectures is what I'm going to call this, that would normally go on our Patreon for our subscribers, and we're going to put it out, for everyone on YouTube. So this is mainly for those of you who have been maybe heard of us or you've been on the fence about trying it out. This will give you a pretty good sampling of what a lot of our content is going to be like. So this is going to be very much geared towards, a competitive play. And what I'm going to talk about today are the Numeron cards, which should be coming out in Battles of Legend, Armageddon's Revenge. They just recently came out in Japan in their collector's pack. And they've been doing pretty well from what I understand. And I'm a big fan of them. And I'm going to go over their effects, their play style, and some sample deck lists that will be, the 2 of them will be legal immediately in the TCG upon, presumably if these are in Battles of Legend, it will be legal then. And then another one will be a Rise of the Duelist deck list, which will come out a few weeks later in August. So let's just get right into it. So these Numeron cards, they do quite a lot, and I think they're very generic and fit into a lot of different decks. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what their effects are. Just real quick. So there's a field spell that says you can activate a Numeron normal spell from your deck. The Numeron normal spell you will always be activating is called Numeron Calling, and it reads if you have a Numeron network, which you do because you're activating it from your whatever, and you control no monsters, you can summon up to 4 Numeron Gate Xyz monsters from your extra deck, which will be these 4 generally. Well, maybe not up to 4, and we'll talk about that later. But you can only summon 1 more time for the rest of this turn. So that's a pretty important restriction, because it means you can't just summon 4 and then just link combo off and just FTK your opponent. You can only do 1 thing. And you have to control no monsters to activate this, so you are pretty limited in what it can do. Thankfully, there are some really great options, such as, and the most common one would be number S0 Utopic Zexal, which this card reads, this may as well be a Numeron card at this point. You overlay 3 number monsters with the same rank, which will be 3 of these. And then you can, during your opponent's turn, detach material, and then your opponent can activate card effects for the rest of the turn. So that's pretty cool. And then it gains 1,000 for each material, so it'll be 2,000, 2,000 after it detaches. So it's not going to be swinging for game on its own, but obviously skipping your opponent's turn will give you quite a bit of time to set up. The third Numeron card is called Numeron Wall, and has 2 very important effects. If you control no cards, or all cards you control are Numeron Wall, so if it's the only card in your field or you don't have any cards, you can send it from your hand or graveyard and activate the field spell directly from your deck. That's super important because it doesn't interact with any of the hand traps, or it doesn't interact with Ash or Droll or anything like that. So very cool. There's not a whole lot they can do to stop it if you're going first. It can basically only get gammaed, but, whatever. And then a second effect is it's a pseudo battle fader. If you take battle damage, you can summon it from your hand and then end the battle phase. So that's pretty relevant. And then here I have, this is just, you're going to put Terraforming in your deck. So basically you have 3 copies of Numeron Network, 3 copies of Numeron Wall, and a Terraforming, and it will give you 7 copies of this Numeron Network. There are more options, which I don't think you should be playing, and I will go into great detail as to why. But here in the side deck, I have the other options. You also have Planet Pathfinder, which is a normal summon that you contribute and then add a field spell from your deck to your hand. And Numeron Wall is level 1. So you can 1-for-1 Numeron Wall. So in theory, you could have 11 Numeron Networks in your deck, but that is not very good, not very mathematically sound, and I will go into great detail as to why that is later. So here I just have these are the standard Numeron cards that you'll see. I believe this is almost every Numeron card that exists. There's like a couple rank up magics that just don't really do much, so you'll probably never play those. And then the extra deck. The two options that I think are viable outside of Utopic Zexal are Infinitrack Fortress Megaclops, which is a link that needs 3 Xyz monsters. It's unaffected by all monster effects except for Xyz monsters, and then it has another effect where you can like reborn an Xyz from your graveyard and like attach an opponent's monster's material. It's insane. So generally, your turn 1 will be you make this, and then if they clear your board, if Numeron Network is still on your field and you control no monsters, you can activate this card again, or you can activate a second copy from your deck. You can get 3 more of these and then make the Megaclops as a crazy follow-up. And then the third card that I think is currently viable is Saryuja, because just you could Numeron Network for Numeron Calling, summon 4 guys, make Saryuja, fix your hand. That's not going to be what you'll do most of the time, but it's a viable option in my opinion. The other 2 options that I don't think are viable now, but could be viable in the future if Utopic Zexal ends up on the Forbidden list, is Appaloosa. So making a 4 material Appaloosa is great, obviously, but why would you ever do that when you could just say your opponent can't activate any card effects? Because all the same cards that would stop Zexal would also stop Appaloosa. Like, an Impermanence will stop Appaloosa just the same as it stops Zexal. Appaloosa is just, in my opinion, strictly worse at this point. There's basically no reason to be making it in this deck. And then Avermax, likewise, is just, it's a big monster that is, hard to kill. It's unaffected by, or it can't be targeted by card effects. So some decks will have a lot of trouble beating it. I personally think that Megaclops fits that role better currently, in that if you're not trying to Zexal and just trying to get out a big threat for your deck, I think Megaclops is the go-to there. I think it is just strictly better. So, and then Saryuja just provides utility that isn't what you'll be making most of the time, but pretty much isn't just a strictly worse option from other ones that exist. So now I want to talk about why, I guess I've made a sort of Numeron core. This is most of the Numeron decks I've built so far, and I believe all 3 of the deck lists I'm going to show today have these cards in it, and I'm going to explain why. And one of the reasons why I think the Numeron cards are so good is because they completely ignore most, if not all, of the hand traps that are currently played. So Ash does not interact with any of the Numeron cards. You can't Ash this. This sends from deck as cost. It's not an effect. It summons from extra deck and make Zexal. Ash doesn't interact with any of that. Nothing is ever on the field. You can't Valor this during, your opponent can't Valor this during their own turn when you activate its effect. Valor does nothing. Same with Mourner. They can Mourner it, but then it just gets its effect on your opponent's turn, so it doesn't matter. It's just back to normal. And the only hand trap that actually interacts with it is Impermanence. They have to chain Impermanence to its effect. And as I mentioned earlier, you can summon up to 4 Exceeds. There's basically no reason to ever summon 4 when you're just going to overlay 3 of them for Zexal. And by basically, there is no reason at all, because they will also get banished during the end phase. So if you summon 4 and then overlay 3 of them for Zexal, the extra 1 is just getting banished, so it doesn't matter. So you will only summon 4 times in your turn, and you cannot get Nibiru'd. When I mentioned earlier that I think Planet Pathfinder is strictly worse than all these other options, it is because Planet Pathfinder will actually be a 5th summon. Your first summon will be Pathfinder, then Numeron Calling summons 3 monsters, and Nibiru counts the monsters being summoned, not the number of times you summon. So then making a Utopic Zexal will be your 5th summon, and you can get Nibiru'd, and then you just did everything for nothing. So, and then you'll probably lose that game. And then Ogre, while it is not super popular at the moment, it is seeing some fringe play. I know specifically a lot of South American players are actually playing Ogre in some more control decks like Invoked Eldritch and even their Synchro Eldritch decks, because it doesn't negate the Fibrax's effect, but it will destroy it, so it removes a Link 2 from the field, and most importantly, it prevents them from making Link Cross. So it does have some niche play at the moment already, and it has the other benefit of being one of the only hand traps that actually interacts with the Numeron cards, because Numeron Network is not an effect that activates when you play it on the field. It is an effect you have to declare after it's already face up, and then you can ogre it, and then, all good. So I do want to before I go into the deck list itself, I do want to explain why I think this is the core I've been playing, with 3 copies of Numeron Network, 3 copies of Numeron Wall, and 1 copy of Terraforming. It gives me 7 ways to access my Numeron, I guess not really a combo because it's 1 card, but 7 ways to access my Numeron engine. And the math behind that is here. I'll explain in a second. So it's very possible you've heard people refer to a normal summon rule in the past, and generally it's been referred to as 5 or 6 summons being the ideal number. I think that is an outdated way of looking at things, and I'm going to explain why. Mainly because I think the math they used to come to that conclusion is outdated in of itself. The game has changed, so even if the math was still correct, I'm not even sure like the way that the game has changed would make it still be applicable. But here, every number highlighted in blue is the percentage chance of you opening with the card with the specified number of copies in your deck. So for example, if you have 3 copies of a card in your deck, like Ogre, right? The odds of you drawing 1 Ogre in your opening 5 cards is 34.52%. And then for something like Numeron Network, as I mentioned, Numeron Network, Numeron Wall, and Terraforming, and Planet Pathfinder, and 1-for-1 and whatever are all essentially the same card. It's not like you're not actually playing 10 copies of Numeron Wall, but you may as well be. So as the number increases, I have the percentage chance of opening 1 copy or 2 copies, or even 3 copies, which matters. And then the green and yellow and red I have color-coded to show the percentage increase for each copy you add. So, for example, you had a 34.52% chance of opening a card with 3 copies. With 4 copies, it is 43.6%. So you had a 9% increase when adding the 4th copy. So the number underneath here is the percentage increase you got from adding a copy. And I put this here to demonstrate the diminishing returns of adding more copies of a card in your deck, and how it increases the chance of seeing 2 or 3 faster than it increases the chance of seeing 1. So for example, once you get to 8, for example, this is where I have it as yellow, you increase the chance of seeing 2 and the chance of seeing 1 at the same rate. And then once you get further than that, to 9 and 10, you actually only see about a 4% increase in opening 1, but almost a 6% increase in opening 2. And this is detrimental because multiple copies of these Numeron cards don't actually achieve anything. Having 2 Numeron networks does not do anything for you. You can only use 1. Even if it gets ogred, it doesn't, like, you can't activate a second one. It's once per turn. So it is a strictly dead card. And where I think this really matters is, I think the Numeron Network card is so powerful, if I were to choose, I would rather open 2 than 0. Obviously, you would prefer to open 1, but I would rather open 2 of it than 0. Which is why I'm okay with having 7 in my deck, and I have a 20% chance of opening 2 of them. Not ideal, but it gives me that 65% chance of opening 3. Once you start getting, further and further along, over here, I actually have the chance of opening 3 copies. And when you start seeing 3 copies of this card is when I personally think things start to go south. And when you have 7 versus 10, you actually triple your chance of seeing 3 copies of Numeron Network in your opening hand. So that is why I think 7 is the number that I think personally is the best. It's where you still get the maximum return on investment for increasing the number of copies. By that I mean you are increasing your chance of seeing 1 still more than you're increasing your chance of seeing 2. And it's where you still are in a reasonable amount. Like, it's very, very low still to see 3, which is where I think the big problems start. This isn't 100% accurate because the Numeron Calling can also still be drawn. So that's more or less a brick. You can't really use it. Well, what you can do is if you draw both Network and Calling, then you can just hard play the Calling instead of using Network, and then you actually can't get ogred. So that is one small advantage of drawing it, but so basically the chance of drawing like a dead card is slightly higher than these numbers here because there isn't a super great way to calculate Numeron Calling being added to this. So these numbers over here, these are actually if you draw 6 cards. So this is this is not quite drawing 6. This is drawing 6 if you could play 3 Upstart Goblin, which here actually all of these numbers are assuming there's Upstart Goblin in the deck. I have Upstart Goblin in all of the Numeron decks except one for a very important reason that I'll explain as well. So this is when I was saying that I think the math most people use to justify 5 or 6 normal summons is outdated, because when you draw 6 cards instead of 5 cards, which, you know, several years ago, back in the day of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's actually been 6 years now, but 6 years ago, when a lot of these theories first started being published, people started talking about them, you drew 6 cards, and Upstart Goblin was at 3, and, well, you drew 6 cards going first, and Upstart Goblin was at 3, and most people played 3 Upstart Goblin. And when you draw 6 cards, it tremendously changes the math with the returns for adding multiple copies, and you start seeing this, I guess, like the red area where I labeled it as seeing 2 increases faster than seeing 1 after 7 cards instead of 9. So that is why I think a lot of people swear by the 5 normal summon rule, because when you draw 6 cards, you would actually get the same, roughly the same consistency with 5 or 6 normal summons in a 6-card hand that you do with 7 normal summons in a 5-card hand. And I'll also argue that the normal summons weren't as powerful back in the day, to the point that drawing 2 normal summons would actually be a pretty big detriment, when now I think... Also, I've been referring to these as normal summons. Obviously, Numeron Network is not a normal summon, but you can't summon during the turn you activate it, more or less, so it's pretty much, like, it may as well be a normal summon. So I think it falls in line with this pretty nicely. But anyway, so I think that 7 normal summons is actually pretty much the correct number you want to be shooting for in most decks right now. It obviously varies based on the power and necessity of the normal summon. For something like Salamangrate, for example, where Flame Buffalo is obviously like nice to have, it lets you, cycle some cards. I would not say it's on the same power level as, this. Right? where like you can, it is not what you're building your entire deck around, right? Like the Salamangrate deck is not built around the necessity of normal summoning Flame Buffalo or Formwood Skipper or something like that. This entire deck is built around balancing how many of these cards you have to maximize the chance you see one and maximize the efficiency of the rest of your cards. So I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, definitely, PM us or something. You can actually go to the Duelist Academy Facebook page, comment down below on the YouTube video, and I will do my best to get back to you if you want any further explanation on, anything in this video, but most importantly this. I think this is the hardest part to follow, probably, that people might need some help with. So anyway, now back to the actual play style of Numeron. I've talked about the math and why I think this is the core engine you should be playing in your Numeron deck. Called by the Grave, I didn't touch on yet. I think it just protects your Numeron Calling from Ogre, and it can block your opponent from Numeron Wall. I am building these under the assumption that this will be an incredibly popular deck, but obviously Called by the Grave, Ghost Ogre, and Impermanence are all very generic cards that have applications against almost anything. So I'm not playing anything super crazy for the purpose of targeting a Numeron mirror match. I am just playing cards that I think match up very well and are still good against other decks. So anyway, So, as I mentioned in the beginning, I said summoning Utopic Zexal is not an auto-win. This card does not win the game by itself. It just does not have enough attack. Which is also why I don't think you can justify playing a deck of, 11 Numeron Callings, summoning Utopic Zexal, and just extending your handshake, because your opponent will probably have something prepared for this card. I think it will be incredibly popular. I think a lot of people will be playing cards to hopefully combat it, such as Gamma or Impermanence or something, maybe Chalice, or when Rise of the Duelist comes out, I believe there are more cards that can help with that as well. So I think you will need a secondary engine to help seal the game, which is where my sample deck list will come in. So the first one is Eldritch Numeron. And I'm going to go over all the cards here. This is a completely... This deck list, to the best of my knowledge, will be TCG legal when Battles of Legend comes out. So it has the core engine I mentioned. It has the 7 ways to access the Numeron network. It has Ogre, Imperm, and this one even main decks Gamma. That was what I decided to be my last hand trap, because Gamma can also protect your Numeron network from Ogre. However, because you're only allowed 1 summon, you can't actually make Omega in this case, because once Gamma resolves, then Calling resolves, you'll summon your 3 guys, and now you are locked into your 1 summon. So if you make Omega, you cannot actually make Utopic Zexal. So unfortunately, Gamma on an Ogre on Numeron network does not also give you Omega, but it can definitely protect some of your other cards like Cursed Outlands or something like that. So, and obviously going second, it is still one of the most powerful hand traps, so definitely still worth playing in my opinion. And you can Gamma your opponent's Utopic Zexal as well, which is what I think is pretty good about Gamma. And the only really unorthodox card I think I have in here, I'm sure everybody is pretty familiar with Eldritch, so I'm not going to explain why I think the Eldritch engine is good. I did include 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. I was just looking for more consistency cards. I think unlike the Synchron Eldritch deck, and where the advantages and disadvantages of the Numeron engine come in are, your Numeron engine is much, much, much more likely to resolve than your Jet Synchron. Like, if Jet Synchron resolves, you're drawing cards, you're ending on negations, or True King of All Calamities, or something like that, right? It's not, but the advantage of Jet Synchron isn't just the board you're making, it's also the cards you're drawing off of Coral Dragon or Formula or something like that. So when you resolve it, you're drawing all your cards, and then you see both engines and you basically win. However, 1 or 2 hand traps will almost completely shut down your entire combo, and then, that's that. This one, most hand traps, as I've been explaining, don't really interact with this. However, it doesn't draw. So I wanted extra cards to just give me a small consistency boost so I can, as consistently as possible, have my Numeron cards and have access to my entire Eldritch engine, which is what I intend to actually be closing the game out. So one thing I haven't really touched on are the going second applications of the Numeron deck, which now that we've gotten to a deck list, I will explain as well. These all 4 of them have the same effect, where if at the end of the damage step they battle, you can detach a material to double the attack of all Numeron monsters you currently control. Obviously, they don't have materials, but thankfully, Konami thought of this, and Numeron Network also says you do not have to detach materials to use Numeron effects. So, in going second, when you go second, there are worlds where you just steal games where you just summon 4 Numerons. Your first one attacks, activates effects, which makes them all go to 2,000. Your second one attacks, only if it attacks a monster. You make your remaining 2 go to 4,000, and then your third one attacks and makes your remaining one go to 8,000. So through a lot of instances, you can probably imagine that will be game. So there are a lot of ways to, I think this will be a very interesting mirror match to navigate, in that you get OTK'd super easily if you leave up a lot of monsters. Because if you leave up 3 monsters, then you give your opponent a lot of opportunities to actually resolve all of their attack doubling effects, and when gate number 4 punches you for 8,000, you're probably going to be dead. However, Numeron Wall exists, which, as I mentioned, is also a battle fader, so it is pretty risky to just go all in with your Numeron cards and just kind of hope it'll get there, because if they do have the Numeron Wall, then you actually don't do anything. Your battle phase gets ended, and then you are forced into one of your other options. So I generally think it's not the best idea to go for that, especially in the mirror. And I think it is better to play a sort of honest game. I do include all 4 gates just in case you need to do that, and for Saryuja, but I generally think it's best to play an honest game, and yeah. Something else to note, all of the deck lists I'm going to show you have in-engine methods to protect your Utopic Zexal from an Impermanence or Chalice or something. So this deck, similarly to how Eldritch could play around evenly matched in some instances, where instead of letting one of your cards get banished, you could have Conquistador like pop itself, so it actually goes to grave. If you do have your engine set up with the help of goods or something like that, and you do have Sanguine and a Conquistador, when you get Impermanenced on your Utopic Zexal, you can chain Conquistador and then chain Sanguine. So then Sanguine will summon your Golden Lord, and then Conquistador will summon itself, and then Conquistador can destroy your Utopic Zexal, so Impermanence will not be able to resolve, and then your opponent can activate any card effect for the rest of the turn. So that is how this deck can play around Impermanence, and one of the reasons why I think all of the engines I'm going to show you have their own merits. So just quickly on the extra deck, Omega for Gamma, and then you can just normal summon an Ogre and make an Omega with land, and then you can put back some of your banished stuff, and you can even, if like it comes to it, I guess shuffle back a Numeron Calling or something. I don't think that will really happen, but and then Pleiades for just 2 guys, and then the rank 10, rank 11 package with the Golden Lords, because you do need a way to actually close the game after you Utopic Zexal. So if you Utopic Zexal and your opponent, and you activate it, now it's at 2,000, your opponent can't play cards. If they just summon a monster somehow and kill it, then you can just use Numeron Network again and then make a Mega Collapse, and you probably win from there. But if they just leave it on the board and they wait, right? Maybe they wait, maybe they set like a Solemn Strike or some sort of trap. They set their trap cards and then pass back to you. If you don't have an engine to actually close the game, if you are just tilting Utopic Zexal to attack mode and attacking, I don't think you're actually in much of a winning position. After turn 1, there's so much more they can do to interrupt it, and they can probably just OTK you on the swing back. So I think it's really important to have these type of cards to actually end the game. And Unicorn seems like an odd pick, but I actually have it because it is, to the best of my knowledge, the only Link 2 or 3 that is generic that can clear your own board. And by that, I mean, if you're in an awkward situation where you really, really need to resolve another Numeron Network, like, again, the situation I just brought up where you resolve it turn 1 for Zexal, then they Impermanence, and then you have to destroy it, so they can't activate any cards, but then now you're kind of stuck. All you really have is Golden Lord and a Conch floating, and like not a whole lot else. If you just put any other monster on the board, such as a Wall or an Ogre or Haquera or whatever, you can turn them all into Unicorn, and then Unicorn can put itself back in your extra deck, which will then put you back to 0 monsters, and then you can Numeron Network in main phase 2, for your guys, and then make a Mega Collapse or a Saryuja or something, and then go from there, and then really develop your game plan. So that is why Unicorn seems a little unorthodox, but I think it is worth it. This might turn into something else. Like, it's definitely possible you can cut Omega and Unicorn and maybe even Pleiades for like a Fiber Selene access code package, but then you'd have to put Valor in your deck, which I don't think is very good right now for a lot of reasons. So I'm hesitant to go towards that. So this is the Numeron Eldritch deck that I've been working on. Now let's go to the next one. So this is a Numeron Guru deck, and this one is really cool in my opinion because To the best of my knowledge, I'm going to say there's like a 5% chance I'm wrong on this. I've done pretty extensive research, but because these cards are literally in Japanese and I am not fluent in Japanese, I cannot guarantee that I'm correct, but I'm pretty sure after you resolve Numeron Calling, you can only normal or special summon once for the rest of this turn. Based on what I read from the Japanese text and the Japanese rule, I believe you are allowed to set. So you can still set Guru, and then play Hidden City over top of your Numeron network, and then flip Guru up and search your Fiendus. So I believe that is how that works. I'm not 100% positive on that, because once again, I'm not fluent in Japanese. So if somebody is and can confirm or deny how this works, that would be great. But even if I am wrong on that and you can't summon Guru the same turn, I still think that this deck has merit for the reason I'm about to explain. And it seems very, very odd that I'm playing Extravagance in a deck that needs so much of his extra deck. But the way this is built, I should have made a spreadsheet on this one too, but that would have been, I think, a little bit too much. Just take my word on this one. I spent a long time doing the math on this one. The only way your Extravagance bricks your Numeron Calling is if one of two things happen. It banishes all 5 of these, because in my opinion, if Extravagance, which I believe there's a 4% chance, give or take, of Extravagance banishing all 3 of a 3 of, if you banish 6. So if you do the 4% and you banish all 3 Zexals, if you still have a Megaclops, I consider that fine. I don't think any Guru deck would be upset with a free 4,000 guy that's unaffected by monster effects, right? Come on. I'm pretty sure every Guru deck that exists is okay with that one. So there's about a 1% chance to banish all 3 Zexals and both Megaclops, or banish all copies of 2 of the gates. Because I have 3, 3, 2, 2, so the technically most likely outcome to brick your Extravagance would be to banish both copies of this and both copies of this, which again is only about 1% for that to happen. So literally 99 games out of 100, if you activate Extravagance, your Numeron network is just fine, and I think you can deal with the 1% of your Numeron network, not literal 1% of your Numeron. It's probably closer to like 1.3%. But so if you don't like a 98.7% chance of just playing Pot of Greed in your deck with no downside, then I don't know what to tell you. I think I take that. Well, I take that every time. So this is just another engine. This one, unlike the Outlet deck, isn't based around ending the game in 1 or 2 turns to capitalize on S0. It's about using the time that S0 buys you to set up a pretty much unbreakable board, right? I mean, not board, but you get traps, you get floodgates, you have hand traps, and you just establish a very, very dominant position. So this is just a very, very heavy control deck. So the ideal world of something like Extravagance, Numeron, whatever, you get S0, Hidden City for Guru, set Guru, flip Guru, get Fiendus, set traps. What can they do? The way that this deck protects S0 is obviously just trap cards, and then if you do have the Guru Fiendus option, then you can protect your S0 from your opponent's impermanence, stuff like that way. So, cool stuff. This one I don't think needs quite as much explanation. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Also, Terraforming is much better in this deck because this either gets Numeron Network, or if you already have a Numeron Network and you draw Terraforming, then you can Terraforming for Hidden City, and it's just insane. So, the final deck I want to show is a Numeron Dragma deck. So this is the one that will be legal with Rise of the Duelist, as I mentioned. So on our Patreon, Vlad has a wonderful Dragma video. So I'm not going to go into deep discussion about the actual Dragma cards. I'll just very, very quickly say this one is a Searcher. It's basically Stratos. This is almost like a Mech Knight, just a big guy, and you can summon it from your hand pretty much for free if you have Dragmas and extra deck cards, and it negates an effect. This is a Rhoda, but it also sends a card from the extra deck, which matters. And this is, it destroys an opponent's monster and sends a card from your extra deck. And they all have the restriction that you cannot summon from your extra deck for the rest of the turn, which is fine. The downside of this deck compared to the other decks I've mentioned is if you draw Numeron Network and Ecclesia in the same turn, you actually cannot use both, which is unfortunate, but is fine because the Dragma engine is basically just a way to capitalize once again on the turns that S0 buys you. So that's basically what this is all about. And the main combo of this deck is the Dragma Rhoda, as I mentioned. It sends a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, and you can't summon from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. So generally, you go Numeron Network, you do the whole song and dance, you get S0, activate this, send Shadal Apcalone. And then Shadal Apcalone triggers whenever it's sent to the graveyard. So you search this for next turn, and then you send Shadal Apcalone. Apcalone then will search a new Shadal card from as a duelist, Shadal Rook, which this is a Miracle Fusion continuous trap that also, it's just, this card's pretty crazy. So basically, you can fuse from your graveyard, which you have an Apcalone in your graveyard, so that's your Shadal monster. And then when you summon a fusion monster, you can send a monster your opponent controls with the same attribute to the graveyard. So this has two interactions where if you open with Numeron Wall, you have a dark in your grave. So you can Shadal Rook, you can banish Apcalone and Numeron Wall, and you can summon Winda. And I don't know about you, but if my opponent's field is can't activate card effects, can only summon once, I'm probably not going to play that game out. And they just searched the Dragma card to kill me next turn. I'm probably conceding. I think the game is done. The other option is, if your opponent would do something to interact with your Utopic Zexal, such as Impermanence, you can actually fuse with your field as well. And you can fuse with your Zexal and the Apcalone to make Construct, and then Construct, I have a little toolbox of Shadals. I have one Shadal Dragon and one Shadal Beast, so Construct will draw or pop a back row depending on the situation. Like in the mirror, you can Shadal Dragon to like pop your opponent's Numeron Network, something like that, or send one of your opponent's Numerons, whatever, or even send their, you can use Rook to send their S0, or S0 during your turn, or something like that. So this is the other Numeron deck that I've come up with, and this will, once again, to the best of my knowledge, be TCG legal with the release of Rise of the Duelist. So, yeah, this was my more or less Numeron primer. I hope everyone enjoyed this. If you did, please, give us feedback. We're really, comment on this video, like, subscribe, etc., etc. And if you like what you saw, check out our Patreon, check out our Twitch stream. We'll have links to those in the description. But yeah, thank you so much if you've stayed with me for all of this. I hope you learned something. I hope it was interesting. And can't wait to make more content for you guys in the future. Take care.